On a frozen moon, at the edge of humanity's reach, an aging dragon draws his final breaths, while a fragile hatchling fights to survive. When fate pulls them together, a secret bloodline is revealed, and the bond they form will change everything. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of love, legacy, and sacrifice that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The first winter storm of Frosthaven had just begun to move across the frozen valleys when Eleanor Hartfield received a message that would change her life. The icy wind outside howled against the steel walls of their habitat, rattling the panels as snow gathered in heavy drifts. Eleanor was 60 years old, a retired frontier biologist who had spent 2 decades living on this terraformed moon. She believed she had seen all that its rugged lands and strange skies could offer. Yet the glowing message on her communication screen made her pause in disbelief. Hovering above her desk was a 3-dimensional projection. It showed a tiny dragon, no older than 6 months. His name, the sanctuary explained, was Ember. His scales were patchy brown and cream, glinting like polished stone under the light. Most striking of all were his wings. The thin membranes stretched between his bones shimmered with faint rainbow colors, catching the light in a way that seemed almost magical. Eleanor leaned closer, whispering to herself, "A hatchling, here of all places." She rotated the holographic image, her eyes tracing the fragile ridges along Ember's face. He looked underweight, his tail bare where scales should have grown. The data feed confirmed he had been found half-frozen in the southern wastes only weeks earlier. Malnourished, fearful, and weak, he had survived by sheer chance. Jonathan, her partner, stepped into the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of synthetic coffee. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and steady, the sort of man who preferred practical answers to mysteries. Setting down the mugs, he studied the projection. "He looks familiar," he said slowly. "Like Glimmer when he was young." Glimmer was their old dragon, resting now in the heated alcove near the wall. Once, he had been a proud ice dragon, his scales shining pure white, his movements swift and strong. But age had softened his sheen into a pale gray, and every step he took now was careful and deliberate. His golden eyes still glowed with wisdom, but his breathing came harder with each passing season. Eleanor turned her gaze toward Glimmer. "The resemblance is uncanny," she murmured. "Look at the wing structure, the shape of the snout. It's as if Ember could be his kin." Jonathan scrolled through the message data. "It says here he was rejected by wild packs. No tail scales." Too weak to keep up. Harsh winter. They pushed him out. He sighed, his breath misting in the chilly air of the room. Poor creature. No wonder the sanctuary is asking for help. Eleanor felt the words cut deeper than she expected. She knew how wild dragons treated the weak when food grew scarce. Survival was merciless in these lands. Yet something about this hatchling pulled at her heart. She could not explain it, but she felt as though Ember had been sent directly to her. Glimmer shifted in his bed, letting out a low rumble that echoed through the room. His eyes fixed on the hologram, and for a brief moment, Eleanor thought she saw recognition in his gaze. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're thinking of adopting him." It was not a question. Eleanor hesitated. The storm outside was worsening, and the journey to the northern refuge would be difficult. Yet Glimmer was aging, and the veterinarian had already told them that companionship would help in his final year. "It might give Glimmer comfort," she said softly, "and it might give Ember a chance at life." Jonathan squeezed her shoulder. "Then we go tomorrow, before the storm grows too strong." Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the habitat as if the moon itself disapproved of their plan. But inside, something unspoken had shifted. They had decided. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She sat by the observation window, watching the aurora twist green and violet across the endless sky. Glimmer dozed beside her, his breathing deep and heavy. She thought of Ember, cold and frightened in his refuge enclosure, waiting without knowing who might come for him. Her mind wandered back to her years as a biologist. She remembered studying dragon migrations, learning how the elder dragons taught their young where to fly, where to hunt, where to rest. Without a guide, hatchlings rarely survived. Ember had no one, no parents, no pack, only the chance that humans would step in before it was too late. Jonathan joined her quietly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You're certain, aren't you?" She nodded. "I don't know why, but I feel like Glimmer knows him. Maybe not in body, but in spirit. Maybe it's fate." Jonathan smiled faintly, though his eyes were heavy with concern. "Then tomorrow, we bring him home." As dawn approached, the storm showed no sign of weakening. Snow lashed across the valley, burying the tracks of supply vehicles, turning the landscape into a shifting sea of white. Yet Eleanor's resolve did not waver. She prepared the transport craft, checked the heating units, and loaded extra blankets. Jonathan gathered supplies, while Glimmer watched with slow, steady eyes. Before they left, Eleanor crouched beside Glimmer, stroking the soft curve of his jaw. "We're bringing someone to meet you," she whispered. "A little one who needs you." Glimmer rumbled again. "See," a deep sound that resonated through her bones. It was not approval nor disapproval, but something heavier, something ancient. As the transport doors sealed and the engines hummed to life, Eleanor felt both fear and hope rise within her. The path ahead was uncertain. The storm outside threatened their journey. Yet in her heart, she knew the call of the North was not something to be ignored. Ember was waiting. And perhaps, just perhaps, this fragile hatchling was meant to become part of their family. The craft lifted into the blinding snow, carrying with it not just two humans, but the weight of a choice that would alter every life in their small home on Frosthaven. The journey to the northern refuge was not simple. Snow battered the transport craft as it pushed through the endless white plains of Frosthaven. Winds screamed across the frozen valleys, and the faint glow of the aurora blurred into streaks of color against the storm. Inside the cabin, Eleanor tightened her coat and held onto the safety bar as Jonathan piloted with steady hands. Every bump reminded her of the risk they had taken, yet her thoughts never strayed far from the image of the small dragon waiting for them. After several hours, the glow of the refuge appeared ahead. It was a biodome nestled between jagged mountains, its lights warm against the bitter cold of the landscape. The dome shone like a fragile lantern, offering hope against the harsh elements. As they landed, the storm seemed to quiet, as if the mountains themselves guarded this hidden place. Waiting at the entrance was Dr. Rosaline Myers, the sanctuary's director. Wrapped in heavy furs, she greeted them with relief. "Eleanor, Jonathan, welcome back. The storm nearly shut down our landing pads, but I'm glad you made it." Eleanor nodded, brushing frost from her sleeves. "We came as quickly as we could. Where is he?" Myers smiled faintly, though her eyes held concern. "Ember has been anxious. Since we showed him your profile yesterday, he's been waiting by the observation window, watching for a transport. It's as though he knows you were coming." They followed her through the refuge corridors, passing enclosures filled with dragons of different sizes and colors. Some were permanent residents, too wounded to return to the wild. Others were growing strong, preparing for eventual release. The air inside was warmer, but the scent of scales, feed, and heated stone filled every corner. The steady hum of generators and feeding systems reminded them that this place was both a sanctuary and a lifeline. Finally, Dr. Myers stopped at a smaller enclosure. "Here we are," she said softly. "Ember, you have visitors." Eleanor stepped forward, and her breath caught. Ember was smaller than she had imagined. Barely 40 pounds, where a healthy hatchling should have been closer to 70. His tail looked vulnerable, and his wings folded tightly against his body. His head lifted at the sound of their steps, amber eyes watching with sharp awareness. For a moment, he froze, nostrils flaring. Then, slowly, he moved closer to the barrier. A low trill escaped his throat, soft and hesitant, but filled with meaning. Dr. Myers raised her brows. "That's remarkable. He's never done that before. Ember has been terrified of every human who approached him. Yet with you, it's different. It's as though he recognizes you." Eleanor knelt near the barrier, her voice gentle. "Hello, little one. You've had a hard start, haven't you?" To everyone's surprise, Ember pressed his small head against the transparent shield, as if trying to reach her. His amber eyes did not hold fear now, but trust. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his earlier doubts fading as he watched the fragile creature's response. "He's chosen you," he said quietly. Eleanor felt her heart swell. She knew in that moment there was no decision left. "We'll take him," she said with certainty. Preparations were swift. Dr. Myers provided medical supplies, heating wraps, and a nutritional plan. "He'll need constant care," she explained. "But with your experience, I believe he has a real chance." Soon, Ember was loaded gently into their transport. At first, the young dragon pressed himself against the floor, trembling as the engines roared to life. The vibrations unsettled him, and his body shook with fear. Eleanor leaned close, speaking in soft, steady tones, her words simple but calming. "You're safe now. You're not alone." Minutes passed, and slowly Ember's breathing steadied. He lifted his head and studied her with those glowing amber eyes. Then, with a small shiver, he climbed into her lap, pressing his warm body against her thermal suit. Eleanor's arms wrapped around him instinctively, holding him as though he were both fragile and precious. Jonathan glanced back from the pilot's seat, his voice quiet. "He trusts you, Abe." The journey home stretched on, the storm still raging outside. But inside the cabin, the tension eased. Ember's small breaths grew steadier, his body finally relaxing. For the first time since his rescue, he seemed at peace. When they reached their habitat, Jonathan carefully unloaded the supplies while Eleanor carried Ember inside. The air was warmer here, the familiar hum of their home comforting. Yet this was the true test, the moment Ember would meet Glimmer. Glimmer, their elder dragon, lifted his head from the heated bed near the thermal vent. His movements were slow, his breathing heavy, but his golden eyes sharpened with focus as he saw the hatchling in Eleanor's arms. The room grew still. Ember tensed, his small claws gripping Eleanor's sleeve. He stared at the larger dragon, his nostrils flaring, his body trembling again. But then, something shifted. Instead of hiding, he climbed down carefully and stood on the floor. Step by step, Ember moved toward Glimmer. The older dragon lowered his head, studying the hatchling in silence. Moments stretched into long seconds, until finally, Glimmer extended one wing and folded it gently around Ember, pulling him close. Jonathan's breath caught. It's like they've known each other all along. Eleanor's eyes filled with quiet wonder. The fragile hatchling who had been abandoned, half frozen and alone, had just been welcomed by the dragon who had guarded their home for years. In that embrace, she saw more than acceptance. She saw the start of something greater. The storm outside raged on, but inside their habitat, a new bond had been formed. Ember was no longer just a frightened hatchling from the wastes. He was part of their family now, chosen not only by the humans who had come for him, but by the elder dragon whose wing now sheltered him. And though the night was long, the warmth of that moment carried them all into the unknown future, where hope had found a fragile but undeniable beginning. Days turned into weeks after Ember's arrival, and the change inside the small habitat was impossible to ignore. Once a trembling hatchling who clung to Eleanor's sleeve, Ember had begun to grow stronger. Every morning he followed Glimmer, copying each movement as though the old dragon were a teacher and he the eager student. At feeding time, Glimmer would demonstrate how to crack frozen fish with a precise strike of his jaw. Ember tried again and again, failing at first, but each attempt brought him closer. Finally, one morning, the sound of a perfect crack echoed through the room. Ember lifted his head proudly, small scales along his neck catching the light, and Glimmer rumbled with quiet approval. Eleanor watched from the table, her heart warming. "It's like watching a master teach his craft," she whispered. Jonathan nodded. Glimmer has found purpose again. Ember is giving him a reason to keep moving. Under Glimmer's guidance, Ember learned the rhythms of the home. He discovered the warmest spots near the vents, how to arrange bedding for comfort, and even the best corners to hide food. Sometimes Eleanor would discover small frozen fish tucked neatly beneath her boots or behind storage crates. She sighed with laughter each time. "Ember, you little mischief maker, you've learned Glimmer's tricks too well." But it wasn't just Ember who was changing. Glimmer himself seemed lighter. Though his scales were duller and his steps slower, the elder dragon no longer carried himself with quiet resignation. Instead, his days filled with teaching and guiding. He no longer simply endured the passing of time. He embraced it, knowing his knowledge was being passed to another. One evening, as the aurora painted the sky in rippling green and violet, Eleanor sat with Jonathan near the window. Ember curled against Glimmer's side, both dragons resting but perfectly in tune. Jonathan spoke softly. "Look at Ember's posture, the way he rests his wings, the way he tilts his head. It's exactly like Glimmer." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "This is more than mimicry. There's something deeper here. It feels like a bond written into their blood." Her suspicion led them to consult the colony's veterinary team. Samples were sent for testing, and 2 weeks later, the results came back. The dragons shared a rare set of genetic markers, proof of a connection across generations. "They are related," the veterinarian explained. "Not parent and child, but distant family, perhaps great cousins through their lineage." Eleanor's eyes had filled with tears at the news. So Ember was never truly alone. Glimmer is his family. From that day, their bond seemed even stronger. Glimmer took pride in every small skill Ember mastered. When the hatchling learned to stretch his wings into the warm updrafts near the heating system, Glimmer hummed a deep, approving tone that resonated across the habitat. Ember, in turn, followed Glimmer everywhere, but never leaving his side for long. Yet as Ember grew brighter and healthier, Glimmer's decline became harder to ignore. His breaths were more labored. Sometimes he struggled to rise in the mornings, his limbs stiff with age. He ate less, and his once powerful leaps had slowed to deliberate steps. Eleanor tried to stay strong, but she felt the weight of it each night as she stroked Glimmer's fading scales. Jonathan, too, noticed the change. "He's teaching everything he can before his time runs out," he said quietly one evening. "This is what the elders do in the wild. They pass on their wisdom before they leave." The thought carried both comfort and sorrow. Still, moments of joy filled their days. Ember's playful nature brought life back into the habitat. He developed a habit of rearranging his bedding into shapes only he seemed to understand, pushing it around with his nose until it was just right. He also began collecting small stones from the edges of the property, hiding them near Glimmer's bed as though offering gifts. Jonathan laughed as he tripped over one of the hidden stones. "He's got personality, that's for sure." Eleanor smiled, watching Ember curl protectively against Glimmer. "He's got loyalty too. Every part of him shines with it." Outside, winter storms continued to rage across Frosthaven. Yet inside their home, there was warmth. The sight of the two dragons together brought a sense of peace even in the harshest nights. As weeks stretched on, Eleanor came to understand something deeper. Ember was not simply a rescued hatchling. He was the bridge between generations. Glimmer had lived long enough to teach him, and Ember had been given the chance to grow strong because of Glimmer's care. One particularly cold night, Glimmer struggled to climb onto his bedding. His legs trembled, and his chest rose and fell with great effort. Ember hurried to his side, pressing his small body against the elder dragon. Humming softly as though lending him strength, Eleanor felt her throat tighten at the sight. "He knows," she whispered. "Ember understands what is happening." Jonathan's eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. "And he's ready. Glimmer has prepared him." That night, Eleanor dreamed of Frosthaven's skies, filled with dragons of every color, soaring together through the aurora. She woke with a sense of certainty. Ember's place in their lives was not chance. It was destiny. Glimmer had carried wisdom and dignity through his years, and now, as his strength faded, Ember carried that torch forward. Bonds had been formed in fire and frost, in hardship and care. Though change was coming, there was no fear in the home. Only the knowledge that love had passed from one generation to another, unbroken, steady, and eternal beneath the endless northern lights. The end came quietly, on a morning when the air outside was still and the storms of Frosthaven had eased. Glimmer lay on his bed near the thermal vent, his golden eyes half closed, his breaths shallow. Eleanor woke to find Ember pressed against the elder dragon's side, humming low notes that sounded almost like a song of comfort. She knelt beside them, her hand resting gently on Glimmer's jaw. "You've done well, old friend," she whispered. "You've given us years of loyalty, and now you've given us Ember." Glimmer lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes, then turned to Ember. With a final deep sigh, he rested once more. His chest rose one last time, and then fell silent. Eleanor's tears blurred her vision. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his shoulders heavy with grief, yet his gaze stayed on Ember. The hatchling made no sound of panic. Instead, he pressed himself even closer to Glimmer, staying by his side until the end. The silence that followed was unbearable. Yet Ember refused to let despair take hold. Within days, he showed a surprising strength. He stayed close to Eleanor and Jonathan, nudging them gently when they sat too long staring at Glimmer's empty bed. He flew short loops in the chamber, performing playful spins until laughter returned to the room. The young dragon carried not only Glimmer's lessons, but also his spirit of resilience. Weeks passed, and Ember grew. His scales gleamed now, his once bare tail fully covered in shimmering plates. His wings, stretched wide, reflected the light in soft waves of rainbow color. He had become both guardian and companion, filling the silence that Glimmer left behind. Then came another call from the Northern Refuge. Dr. Myers contacted them with news of a young female dragon in need of a home. Her name was Luna. She had been rescued from the wild, thin and frightened, much like Ember had once been. Eleanor hesitated, unsure if they were ready for another change. But Ember made the decision for them. When Luna's image appeared on the screen, the young dragon studied it intently. Then he trotted to his toy pile, picked up his favorite stone, a gift he had once carried to Glimmer, and placed it gently beside the screen. Jonathan smiled quietly. That's his way of saying yes. Soon, they prepared their transport once again. The journey to the refuge felt familiar, but this time, there was no fear in the cabin. Ember pressed against the window, his amber eyes sharp, as though he understood he would soon become the teacher instead of the student. Luna was smaller than Ember, but carried the same rainbow shimmer in her wings. At first, she trembled when the humans approached, but Ember walked straight into her enclosure, humming softly. He pressed his wing against hers, and to everyone's surprise, Luna leaned into him with trust. The return home was different from Ember's journey months earlier. Luna trembled less, calmed by Ember's steady presence. When they reached the habitat, Ember guided her to Glimmer's old bed, now his own, and showed her where the vents warmed the air. He offered her pieces of food, cracked open in the exact way Glimmer had once shown him. Eleanor watched with awe. He's passing on everything he learned. Days turned into weeks again, and a new rhythm formed. Luna followed Ember closely, copying his movements just as he had once copied Glimmer. She learned to stretch her wings into the warm updrafts, to arrange bedding, even to hide food in secret places. One morning, Eleanor found a small fish tucked into her boot, and she laughed through her tears. He's taught her his tricks already. Yet Ember was not only repeating Glimmer's ways, he was shaping new ones. Where Glimmer had been reserved, Ember was playful. He encouraged Luna to leap higher, to run faster, to explore the corners of their habitat with youthful curiosity. One evening, as the aurora shimmered across the sky, Eleanor sat by the window with Jonathan. Ember and Luna were curled together, their wings overlapping. The fading sunlight caught their scales, painting the room in colors of green, violet, and gold. "It's like Glimmer never left," Jonathan said softly. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes filled with wonder. "No, it's more than that. Glimmer gave us Ember, and Ember is giving us Luna. The love continues. It never ends." The sanctuary soon confirmed what they had suspected. Luna carried the same rare genetic markers as Ember and Glimmer. She was part of their bloodline, a hidden thread that fate had drawn back to them. When Eleanor read the results aloud, Ember lifted his head and rumbled deeply, pressing his snout against Glimmer's memorial stone. Luna followed, touching her nose to the stone as well. In that moment, Eleanor understood Glimmer's final gift. He had not only ensured Ember's survival, he had made certain that love, loyalty, and family would live on through his descendants. Seasons shifted, and Frosthaven's storms returned. But within their small habitat, warmth never faded. Ember had grown into a magnificent guardian, and Luna thrived under his care. The house echoed with life, from the trilling calls of the dragons to the laughter they inspired in their human companions. And on one quiet night, as the wind howled outside, Eleanor sat with Jonathan, watching the two dragons rest. Ember spread his wings wide, folding them around Luna, and then extended them far enough to include the humans as well. It was a gesture of protection, of belonging, of family. Jonathan's voice broke the silence. "He has become everything Glimmer hoped he would be." Eleanor nodded. and more. Ember carries Glimmer's legacy, but he also carries his own. He is proof that love can outlast even time itself. Under the shimmering light of the aurora, with Ember's wings wrapping them all in warmth, they knew the cycle of love and guardianship would never be broken. It would live on, passed from dragon to dragon, from heart to heart, an unending chain forged in fire, frost, and devotion. On a frozen moon, at the edge of humanity's reach, an aging dragon draws his final breaths, while a fragile hatchling fights to survive. When fate pulls them together, a secret bloodline is revealed, and the bond they form will change everything. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of love, legacy, and sacrifice that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The first winter storm of Frosthaven had just begun to move across the frozen valleys when Eleanor Hartfield received a message that would change her life. The icy wind outside howled against the steel walls of their habitat, rattling the panels as snow gathered in heavy drifts. Eleanor was 60 years old, a retired frontier biologist who had spent 2 decades living on this terraformed moon.